Okay, I think it's about time. Well, I want to welcome everybody to our latest and greatest webinar. We do it in a podcast style. What we like to do for these is we like to pull in different members of the Iron Edge team, and we talk about a subject. Generally, what we do is we pull in our leadership, or we pull in people that are consultants on our side. And then we talk about different subjects, and we want you as the listener to have a better understanding of what the topic is that we're talking about, right? That's kind of our shtick. And what we try to have a nice laid back time, so be prepared for that. Mr. Andrew Moore is not on this one. He's our COO. Normally he leads these and he does an excellent job. He's not here today, so we all want to give him a shout out. Hi, Andrew. I'll be taking us through this journey today, and we're going to talk about OneDrive. And what we're going to talk about today is, what is it? You know, in a general sense, how does it work? How did IT grow to the point where we can use cloud-based storage and it's a viable option? What are the pros of it? What are the cons of it? And what kind of things do decision makers need to know about the product if they want to implement it? So that's at a high level what we're going to talk about as a group. And I've got some wonderful gentlemen here with me on the presentation. And but first, without further ado, I'm gonna sell Iron Edge for just a second. So this is a terrific slide. It says what we do. We're a managed services provider. We provide outsourced IT. We do projects. We do BI. This is a terrific slide that shows kind of what we do, right? So this is why you would bring us in to help you. If you're a company that's looking to implement OneDrive, you know, certainly you could come to us and we could do that for you. So the first bullet point there on that slide is skilled IT team. Right. And I would like to say, not only are we skilled in IT, but lots of folks that work for us are skilled in all kinds of different things. And I want to talk about that for just a minute before we get started. So we are blessed with the privilege of Mr. Patrick Messe joining the panel today. I like Patrick a lot. He was one of my original mentors 7 years ago when I started at Iron Edge. I wanted to talk about the skilled IT team because Patrick has all these exceptional skills in IT. Of course, that's why he's on this presentation. But also, Patrick is a pretty well-known keto influencer, and that has kind of morphed into being a really well-regarded photographer of food. So I wanted to point that out, and I say, Patrick, how long have you been in photography in particular as a hobby? Tell me about that.
Well. Nothing professionally. I mean, I just started photography. I picked up a camera, frankly, when my wife and I got married 20 years ago. Just to take pictures.
Don't be modest, Patrick.
Yeah, his stuff is good, y'all. Y'all go look him up. It's terrific. And Patrick,
but I enjoy it.
Yeah.
No, I enjoy it. It's fun. It's a good challenge. It kind of falls into the realm of technology where you have to kind of know all of the different gears to turn to get it to look right. So it's fun. It's a challenge, cool. And it's a great little hobby of mine.
That's awesome. And y'all certainly can look him up. You'll find him on Instagram. You'll find all the photos of the food and stuff, and they're tremendous. So if you didn't know that about him and he's your account manager, now you have something to talk to him about because that stuff's amazing. I want to talk just for a second about Mr. Branson Braid. Now, Branson and I have worked on the same team and together for 4 years, Branson?
4 years.
4 years. I mean, Branson and I worked together on probably hundreds of different assignments and projects now. So just like Patrick, not only is he a skilled pre-sales engineer, he's a network engineer, he's a really good consultant, but also I'm amazed at Branson's ability to be a musician. You can play 5 instruments?
7.
7.
Why do that to me, Dan?
Sorry, I sold you short. 7. Yeah, and you've been playing since you were a kid?
Yeah, since I was 8, started piano and then worked my way up. So it's been my lifelong hobby.
Yeah, that's terrific.
I just continue to put time into. So
and you played at our last Christmas party. It was terrific. It was terrific.
I did, which was a good time, a very good time.
Yeah, we tend to have those, or holiday party. Excuse me. Want to make sure I get that. Okay, so let's jump over to the subject today. Again, we're talking about Microsoft OneDrive. So that is our slide here. Ta-da, the OneDrive slide. Let's jump forward. So really high level, I want to start this thing off. And if you're on this webinar and you're like, well, what is it? People talk to me about it. I'm not sure exactly what it is. I'm going to boil it down to its most basic components. All right. All Microsoft OneDrive is, it's a a product that Microsoft offers within the Office 365 suite. So you get it if you pay for Microsoft Office 365. And what you'll see on the slide here is on the left side, the way OneDrive works is you have a folder on your computer and it's called OneDrive. And you can see that in the picture there on the left. That's a folder on my computer. And when I set up my OneDrive, I can drag anything to that folder that lives on my computer, and it syncs through the internet to Microsoft's cloud. I can then go to a web page and get to that file again, right? So it's your file storage that's located in the cloud. That's all it is, right? So you can hear all this stuff about it. That's basically what it is. It's a file or it's a folder that lives on your computer. You drag stuff to it and it syncs out to the cloud, right? So that's boiling it down as basic as possible. So where I wanted to start today and what I want Patrick to talk about for just a second is how do we get to the point where now we are able to store tons of information in the cloud and it's fast, it's easy to get to, and it's cheap. Patrick, take us back 10, 15, 20 years when you started. Where did people store their files and what problems or advantages did that have?
Thanks for picking on the old guy here.
I'm the same age you are.
Gray hair.
I wasn't gonna say.
I shaved my beard because it's gray. It's white. I look like Santa Claus with a ginger top. I look ridiculous.
Well, I mean, the history of computing in a couple of minutes.
Sure.
So basically, back in the day, we had mainframe computers, and this was really a limitation of technology. You'd have, a computer that took up the entire room that had the same computing power as your phone sitting on your desk.
Right.
And so really when people had workstations at the time, they didn't have the computing power to run them locally. So they had to all talk to that giant computer that sits in a room somewhere so that they could do their work. And as stuff evolved, technology got a little bit more powerful and you were able to put more technology into a smaller box that could sit on your desk.
Yep.
That became the personal computer.
Yep.
And at that time, you were dealing with 100 megabytes of data that you could use. And people started, storing a little bit of data on your local computer. Now you got to remember at the time, this was probably the 80s or so. The internet didn't exist at the time, right? You didn't have what we know now as the cloud. Right. So as technology evolved, computers got, more and more advanced, and you could store more and more data on these computers. And so you had this local network starting to evolve where you had, little workstations that lived in offices and a server that kind of lived in the back closet where you could store your data. But again, internet at the time, you had maybe a megabit connection if you were lucky, a T1 connection. Not by any means any way of storing files in the cloud. So at the time in the 80s and 90s, the only option you had really was to either store your files on your local computer or on a server that lived in the closet. And that's how it worked for 10, years. 20, 30 years, even recently, right? And a lot of people still use servers as their main storage component.
Right.
But really, it's been in the past 10 years, really, that technology has gotten to a point where, internet's fast enough that you can start using a lot of this stuff that is accessible in the cloud. You can grab these files that are, pretty big in a pretty instant fashion. And so really the industry has started to evolve in a way where they're leveraging, these quote big mainframes that now live out in the cloud because internet is now fast enough and your network is now stable enough to start leveraging these kind of things. So we've really come full circle, right? We started off in a way where we had a mainframe with workstations that would talk to it because they weren't powerful enough. Then we moved into a world where, internet wasn't fast enough. So we had to kind of live in a local area network. And then internet became, the past 20 years has become big enough where now that's evolved in a way where everyone's moving back to the cloud or moving back into the mainframe because at this point, there's no reason to store anything locally. I mean, all that data, you give that to somebody else that can worry about keeping it up and keeping it backed up and keeping it stable. And all you need is an internet connection. And it's great.
There were some key things I think in the years that got added to computing that allowed this to happen, where now we're able to store all this stuff on the cloud, which is, you brought up bandwidth, right? Internet bandwidth got fast enough that you could move big files back and forth. And I think that was really, really important. And the second thing that had to happen for you to be able to leverage an option like OneDrive or Dropbox or Box or whatever is storage got cheaper. Years and years ago, storage was so expensive, especially on the cloud, that you couldn't really make the jump to go put all your data out in the cloud. Now with OneDrive, you get a terabyte of space per user. That blows my mind. So really, to summarize how we got here, computing advanced enough to where internet got fast enough, storage got cheap enough, and security kept up with that to where now it is a real viable option to store stuff outside of your local environment.
Yeah.
So that's got us to this slide here, which is anywhere access. So obviously the biggest advantage to having your data stored out in the cloud, and when I say cloud, if you don't know exactly what that means, that just means on someone else's computer, right? Someone else's computing system. And in this case, for OneDrive, it's Microsoft, right? So the big advantage that gives you is that you can then, access that data from anywhere if you have a browser, right? And that's huge. Now, Branson, remember back in the day when you had your server and you had your corporate office, you had your server with your data living in it, but you were out, you were running around, you're on vacation. How would someone then access that data on their server in their corporate office?
The traditional way that most of us are really familiar with is VPN.
Yeah.
You really, like you said, as we move to the cloud, one thing that's kept up with it is the security piece.
Yes, it has.
So when you talk about how you access data traditionally, it's in a secure fashion.
Yes,
so you're
sir.
not just going to connect back to your office. You're going to have to use VPN, securely connect back in, and then access the files that you need to. And I hope that it really, that at that point, you're at the mercy of the bandwidth of your office. Unfortunately,
that's a good point.
You can have the fastest internet you want at home, but if your office is on 50 meg or 100 meg and you still have everyone else at home trying to remote in to get their files, you're at the mercy of your office.
That's
so
true.
Really migrating all those files to a location that is built for efficiency, for how you access it, for how it's saved, how it's backed up, it really grants you what you need to access it anywhere. But there's an interesting piece that I want to add to that, Dan. You talked about a browser.
Correct.
A lot of people have held back from migrating towards cloud infrastructure because it's been seen that you need simply a browser to access it. Now, while that's the primary access for it, there are other avenues. And you talked about at the beginning, the local sync up to that device has it on your computer. There are ways for it to be locally accessible at all times. But another key function is Office 365's mobility apps. So there's an app for OneDrive, and there are ways to secure it so that it's only on a work device and you don't have it on somebody's random device. And we'll talk about how you do data loss protection for where that data lives and how it's acceptable for living there. But having all these different avenues to access your data anywhere is really, really a provision from Microsoft that you can't really pass without looking at it and evaluating for everyday use.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we saw over the last 10, 15 years of computing is as companies like Dropbox and Box built out they're doing the same thing that OneDrive is, right? As they started to do that and these things started to pop up outside of people's corporate IT environments, it created some problems. And data loss prevention is one of those. So what I saw through my career is you would have your, folks that had their internal corporate network and you had to VPN in. It was kind of a pain in the butt, and VPN can cause security issues and all this stuff. So what people did to solve the problems is Mary Jane in accounting would create her Dropbox just for herself. And she would put stuff in it. She would access it outside of the office and whatever. Well, the problem with that, and people start doing that all over the company. And the problem with that is, as the IT team and the compliance folks know, you don't know where your data is going. You don't know if it's going to someone's Dropbox personally. You don't know if it's being shared to someone that you wouldn't intend. So as these solutions became available, it kind of became a problem. So what IT guys like us, what we did is we prevented Dropbox on computers, or, we would sign up for the corporate version of Box just so we could monitor what was going in, what was going out, and who had access to what. But the downside to those is those systems were really a third party system maintained outside of your normal infrastructure, which makes it hard on your IT team, makes it hard on your operations team, because you have your normal stuff you manage as an IT team. You have your domain and your Active Directory and all these things, right? Well, then you have this other thing that you have to keep up with, and you have to maintain users in, and you have to make sure you dispo people. So over time, people did adapt to those solutions, but they created their own set of problems. Security was a really big problem as well, right? So security and access and all these things. So that segues really well into the next slide, that the positive that you get from moving to the cloud is anywhere access, but it creates an immediate negative. And ta-da!
I was just going to hop in on that
Yes, sir.
last note,
Please.
Dan. So rogue IT, which is what you were kind of talking about,
Yes.
which is what people will do unbeknownst to, leadership, ownership,
Right.
IT. Those are what people will go out and use on their computers because it works for them, right?
They're solving a problem. Yeah.
Solving a problem.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
Dropbox came on the scene because they came out with, a product that was easy to use.
Yep.
It wasn't complicated, and it got the job done, right? And so people really quickly adopted that product because it was so easy.
Yeah.
And if you're an organization that doesn't embrace the convenience of some of these tools, you're going to find that your users are going to go out and do it outside of your knowledge, right? And that's what you want to try to avoid. So by embracing these technologies where you're giving them the convenience, giving them the tools to get their jobs done easily, it allows you to not only be able to have a handle on your data, but also give your users the freedom to use a more convenient option than, say, leaving your files on a file server, which makes it very difficult to get access to.
That's a terrific point. One of the things I wanted to talk about as we segued over to protection, right, is what IT people love is when they have one system to manage. And I kind of alluded to it a second ago. When you have like 5 different systems to manage, mistakes happen. You forget to dispo somebody out of this system, or this system isn't updated and it's insecure or whatever. Well, what's really cool about OneDrive, and we'll talk in specifics about OneDrive here in just a second, but what's really cool about OneDrive and what we've seen across our clients, I'm sure Branson, you've deployed stuff like this. Once you deploy OneDrive and the client is in, or people listening are in OneDrive and your mail's in there and it's a business version of OneDrive, which is where your work mail lives, there's tons of controls in there that are security controls, right? And also your user list and everything else is managed in the same platform that your email is. So my point with that is it's one platform to manage for your IT team, for your audit and compliance team. It makes it much, much easier to deal with this. There's less mistakes. And the platform inherently has a lot of really well-baked security features. And we're going to talk about them in just a second. But that is a big advantage of the OneDrive product in particular, is that, tons of our clients, not all of them, but most of them are moving over to Office 365 and web-hosted mail. Well, once you move over to that, what I'm telling my clients, if they haven't adopted OneDrive yet, well, it's free basically on almost all the SKUs you can buy. You're getting it. You get a ton of storage. Your user maintenance is condensed into the same thing that manages your email. And the security settings are all the same and similar and in the same platform. So there's a huge advantage there, right? So the point I wanted to make was, while ease of use and being able to hit the data from anywhere is a huge advantage, it also creates security problems. And one of the security problems, I don't know if Branson or Patrick want to talk about this, is when you've moved over to Office 365, when you move over to Office 365, anybody can access your environment if they know your username and password, right? Because all they have to do is they go to office.com, it has a login, you enter the username and password, and they're in immediately. That's different than if you host your own email server. Somebody wouldn't necessarily know how to get to that. It's not as easy. It's not an obvious of target as office.com. And then you log in and you hit the mail, right? So that created a different set of problems for people. Ease of use is awesome, but that target is much, much bigger for people to want to attack. The attack vector is massive, right? Because gazillions of people are in Office 365 and it's easy to get to. All you have to do is office.com and log in, right? So what we've seen our clients do, probably the most important thing we can advise you from a protection standpoint for any system, but I would say arguably most importantly, the OneDrive and SharePoint data you store is to turn on multi-factor authentication within the platform. While it is a pain in the butt, and we've talked about that in previous webinars, it's massively important. It's not impossible to access the accounts with it turned on, but it makes it very, very, very hard.
I want to add something small there, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things when we talk about security, they get added as something that's added that's too much for me to do. And a lot of times it comes down to efficiencies. How efficient are we making this login? Sometimes that can be single sign-on, so that login that they're getting to is in one single location and no one is going to office.com to have to log in, and we still have that multi-factor authentication on. Or making sure that multi-factor authentication isn't an SMS message and instead is the Authenticator app for Microsoft. Mm-hmm. There are some small pieces that when you move to the Office 365 environment, it's about maximizing the efficiencies, including how you protect the environment. So we talked about moving your files from on-prem to that cloud, and now it's protected behind multi-factor authentication. Right. But it's also about how that gets shared and how it gets backed up. So, well, you can go ahead and speak about it because I know what you want to say, because you and Patrick deal with it for all of our clients. It's something that we really preach because it's something that some people just don't know from Microsoft about how their data is protected there.
Patrick, do you want to speak about?
Yeah, sure.
We'll jump over to backups, and particularly Office 365 backups. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about protection. So I know really this transition where people are still a little reluctant because they don't know how the cloud works or how their data is stored. Right. There's still a lot of uncertainty from people out in the market of, is it safe to keep your data, with someone else's servers, right? Sure. And what's interesting to note is that, when you have your data locally on your own server or in your own network, there's a limit to the amount of security you can put into your own network from a budget standpoint, right? You're not going to have the deep pockets that Microsoft has to be able to wrap a security and layers of security on your environment. Right. And so when you're running this, unless you're a large enterprise, when you're running this internally and you have, data that you need to protect, the amount of different protection layers that you'd have to put in place to match something that would be in the cloud would be very, very expensive. Yes. And cost prohibitive. Yeah. So it's from a security standpoint, there is actually a lot more tools, a lot more auditing, a lot more logging, a lot more protection mechanisms that Microsoft has built to complement their products because they're serving multiple industries. And these industries have various levels of security requirements, and they have to build it regardless. And so they offer a lot more security that you can put on your data that's in the cloud versus what you could afford to do locally. Unless unless you want to spend, $100,000+ on security. Locally, it's very cost prohibitive to do that. So when you think about security and in the cloud, the short answer is there's a lot more tools that you can leverage with a product like OneDrive and Microsoft that gives you that ability to monitor your data. Because not only is protection where you're creating a wall around your sensitive information important, but the ability to monitor that is also just as critical, right? Yes. So if you're putting in the safeguards and security measures in place, you want to make sure that you're pairing that with a good solution to monitor if something should happen. That's a great point. That's a 1-2 punch with regards to security and your data.
Yeah. And a good segue from the 1-2 punch is we tell this to our clients is, yeah, sure, Microsoft has systems in place to back up their infrastructure and to back up stuff, right? So if they have a server that dies, they're going to spin up a new server, that type of thing. They've got all that lined up. But what they advise you to do, and what is best practice, is to have a third-party method to back up all of your OneDrive, SharePoint, and mail data. And we suggested to all of our clients that have an Office 365 tenancy, and it's really reasonably priced. I think we offer it as part of one of our packages that people can buy from us, which, they get all the support and all that stuff. But it is critically important, right? You can restore files just like you can imagine, right? You can go in and restore a mail file or a SharePoint file or whatever, as opposed to Microsoft restoring your entire SharePoint site. That's a totally different thing. So if you're using Office 365 right now and you have SharePoint, OneDrive, and Mail, I would highly suggest that you look into a third-party backup tool. They're easy to set up.
Microsoft actually explicitly says you need to have your own backup system, because they're not responsible for it.
Yeah. And so we yes, sir. I'm sorry to interrupt you. We say that to everybody. Yeah.
There's a piece that I thought about in relation to how you back that data up.
Yes, sir.
It's about correlating how you're moving from your on-prem to the cloud. You're also looking at cost, the change in cost of maintaining the infrastructure of what it takes to maintain a file server of that size on-prem.
That's a terrific point.
When you think about user data and user shares, sometimes that can top a terabyte or two of just data that you have to back up. When you get excited about having a terabyte per user in the cloud, there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
If you can imagine a 20-person company giving each individual a terabyte of data, that's an extremely large server to even try and back up at all and maintain.
Yeah.
So you're shifting the cost of what you're trying to maintain on site to, as you've said, protect and maintain in the cloud, have access anywhere, and have it behind an entire system that's protected by Microsoft.
Yeah, that's a terrific point. And that's a selling point I try to use when we're talking about this with clients is sure, you can continue to host your stuff on-prem, right? And Patrick did a really good job of describing why Microsoft is they're going to be better at security than you are. They're going to have more resources to invest in security than you are. And I'm going to trust that Microsoft servers are patched. I'm going to trust, that they have the experts on their team to maintain those and to ensure they're set up to best practice. You may have an IT guy that wears 10 different hats, and he has set up your file server, and he set up the permissions, and he set up all this stuff. Well, is that going to be to the same standard that Microsoft does? You may feel better about it because you know physically where that server is. You can see it. But my feedback as a consultant is Microsoft's going to be better at it. So if that's a concern to you, I would really consider going the Microsoft route. I did want to jump over to the next slide real quick. We've been trucking for about 30 minutes. We have a few minutes. I did want to say right now, I want to stop. We do have a Q&A at the end. Most of the time we'll get in and the panelists will address questions that are posted in the Q&A. Sometimes, of course, we may need to go, we say, I don't know right now. We'll go look and we'll respond in a follow-up email or a follow-up discussion. But that will happen here in just a few minutes. So I'm going to jump over to the next slide. And what I have here is an example of something that we talk about consistency, and that are consistently in these webinars, which is don't assume that when you move to a platform like Office.com or Office 365, or say a line of business website that you use, don't assume that the security is set up as a most secure environment. I would assume that whenever you start a new product and you're adapting to, you're moving into Office.com or Office 365, I would assume it's set up with the least amount of security possible. I'm going to show that as an example. So if you look at the slide here, you can see on the left image here under Protect, it says external sharing. There's two sliders right there. One's for SharePoint, one's for OneDrive. My assumption is you want to start with the least amount of permissions available to everybody. And then as you need to add permission to that, you need to share more stuff out. Those permissions would creep up. But take this and file it away. This is not the default setting of this product. Right? The default setting of Office 365 is not to defer to least permissive. And that's important. So if you're on this call today and you have an internal team that manages your Office 365, or, and they manage all this stuff, you're going to want to ask them the question, how is this set up? Is it set up where we can share outside of the organization? And if it is, that's an operational question. Do you need to, and what's the risk? Right. So that's one thing we pointed that out many times, that don't just assume that everything's set up with the most security, because it's not, and if you have any questions on how your system is set up, give us a call, get with your IT team, get with anybody, and we can help you make sure everything's locked down to the way you want it. And then the screenshot on the right there that says compliance. And this is all the stuff that's within SharePoint and OneDrive, all the extra features that you can add in. And Patrick was alluding to this just a few minutes ago. These are all things that you can set up here. And there's auditing, data loss prevention features. There's retention rules. There's e-discovery stuff for your legal team. You can get alerts when certain actions happen inside of your OneDrive, your SharePoint. It's really powerful. And there's a lot of stuff to it. So I would be reasonably sure to say, all those features aren't on your regular file server that you have right now, right? So you're getting a layer of security that is pretty mature.
And they give you a pretty good offering with the basic packages of at least some reporting and auditing measures. Right now, Microsoft has plenty of different tiers and different package levels. You can always, if you have any sort of regulatory oversight or mandates, they have different level tiered packages that give you more and more security and more auditing measures. So it just depends on what your organization needs and what your threshold is for understanding the security of your data.
Yes, sir. One thing that I want to point out that we haven't really talked about yet, some people will come to me and say, what's the difference between OneDrive and SharePoint? They look the same. They especially do now. If you've looked at OneDrive in the last 5 years, it looks exactly like SharePoint. So Branson or Patrick, what's the difference, and why would you use one over the other? Are they the same? Are they different? Or what's the deal with that?
They both have some sharing features, but
sure,
when we talk about collaboration,
that's it.
Collaboration includes individuals. Yeah, so what we like to look at it as is your OneDrive is your replacement for your H drive or your personal drive. So it is something that while you can share from and you can get share permissions, it's typically used for one's individual items. Now, SharePoint is more of a collection. SharePoint is based more so on your team's definitions and your operational user groups within your organization. Yeah. So that allows you to share within your team, and it does have restrictions on how you do that outside sharing as well.
Yeah.
That's SharePoint.
Yes, sir.
SharePoint's
Please.
Microsoft's replacement for your file server, essentially. Yeah. And OneDrive is, think about that as your My Documents on your computer. It would be really relational to your own personal data. That's the best way to think about it. So SharePoint's set up in a way so that you can share with teams and departments and organizations and people outside of your company. And OneDrive, while you can share files with other people, it's really about the individual.
Right. Yeah, I 100% agree with what both the guys said. And I say it the same way when I'm pitching it. Like, what you'll see often in corporate environments is people have their H drive, and they know anything they drop in their H drive folder, it's saved. Well, that's exactly what I draw the line to, the parallel to the OneDrive folder that lives on your computer. Anything you drop to it is saved. That reminds me of something else I wanted to bring up. Now, the installation of OneDrive that I personally really like, and I suggest to my clients, is the way I showed you, which is there's a folder basically called OneDrive. The way the product is set up by default is anything you drop in there is synced to the cloud. Well, there's other options too. You can set up your OneDrive in your settings on each computer to sync your My Documents, sync your photos, to sync your desktop, to sync just about anything. It's pretty easy to do it. Now, and you may consider that, oh, man, we really need everybody to sync our desktop over to OneDrive, and we need them to sync whatever. Well, consider that a little bit. And I always like telling folks that, look, anything you drop in the OneDrive folder is going to sync. That's going to eliminate some of the space that's taken up. It's going to make sure that they're only saving the important things. Like even me, when I work, my desktop's just filled with all kind of garbage and stuff that I'm messing around with. Well, I don't necessarily need that stuff backed up. It's not necessary, right? So really consider, like, if you get it, we're going to provide some hyperlinks of some resources on OneDrive that I put together. Some of those will talk about how to set up OneDrive and really consider how you want to set it up. And my suggestion to people is kind of make it a little bit hard to sync stuff out to the cloud, because you just don't want to sync everything because you can. I don't want to sync my photos on this computer out to the cloud. Like there's no advantage of that. So just consider that. But I bring that up to say there are some customization options. One of the really neat things with OneDrive is you can choose where you want your files to live. Like in other words, you can choose if they're always syncing, right? So you always have a copy on your machine and you always have a copy in the cloud and they sync back and forth. Or you can choose another really cool option in the settings where it lives in the cloud and doesn't take space on your local computer. As IT has grown through the years, what we've seen is hard drives get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's the reason, because computer manufacturers are assuming that you're storing everything in the cloud. So if you set up your OneDrive with the feature of basically anything you drop in that folder, what it does is it copies it out to the cloud and it erases it from your local computer. So it's still saved. And then whenever you need it, it'll either open it from the cloud and you edit it in the browser, or you can pull down a local copy. But the main goal of that is to save space on your hard drive. So that's pretty cool. So that is some options that you can do within the product. Okay, I'm going to jump over one more slide here. And that is basically it. So the summary of what we've talked about today is computing has basically got to the point where internet speed, storage, and security allows companies like Microsoft to have a really attractive option that can replace storing files in a server that you maintain. In some ways, it's better. It's accessible from anywhere. I would argue it's probably more secure as long as you have proper security settings in place like multi-factor. So if you haven't considered those items, or if you're considering moving over to OneDrive, it's really, really attractive. You may want to get with your IT decision makers. You want to call a firm like ours to help talk to you about it, and really consider how you can move your environment to that. Now, as a final, this slide reminded me, as a final point, the companies that were using systems like OneDrive and SharePoint whenever, hurricane hits or there's a disaster or there's a COVID work from home thing for 6 months, those companies were already ready to go on day one. Their files lived in the cloud, their files lived in SharePoint and OneDrive, and they were ready to work. So, just from the disaster recovery and BCP scenarios, it's a really, really attractive option.
I would
yes,
give
sir.
you some experience of what we saw really with the COVID situation,
Yes.
where we had, a mix of different clientele that were both in the cloud and ones that were not. They were still on the traditional server model. And suddenly, overnight, everyone had to work from home. Yep. And a lot of the clients that hadn't already adopted the cloud model were scrambling. And Iron Edge, as an IT provider, we were trying to work as hard as we can to get them to a point where they're basically, cobbling together a solution to get them to work from home. Whereas these other companies that had already adopted the solution, like OneDrive, didn't miss a beat. I mean, they were able to work from home, access all their files, all their data, because they were already familiar with it. And so, as we're looking at kind of this new model of the workforce, where you're either going to be working from home for the foreseeable future, or this hybrid model of going in and out, really, if you haven't already, seriously look at adopting some sort of cloud solution like OneDrive, because really it's the new way that we're working these days, and this is how we've evolved, and the COVID situation had forced that onto us, and so it's an important step for any organization to evolve to.
I completely agree.
As Andrew would say, burn the boats.
Yeah, burn the boats, move over to it, and make that solution really work for you, and then adapt to it and see how it can make you even better. Right. Once you burn the boats, you have the solution. You have to figure out how to make it better, and it will make your business better. It made moving to the cloud for us completely with all these things has made our business better, and it's made us work better. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming today. Now I'm looking at the question and answer, and there is an amazing question. Now, please, if you want to answer a question, just type it in the question and answer thing. And it's from Mr. Ryan Lacken.
Yes, I think it's Bacon.
Brian Bacon. Yes. And he says, question, I love all your music choices. Well, thank you, Ryan. We appreciate the question.
I feel as though it's a fabrication.
So, of course, Ryan Lakin's the owner of Iron Edge. He's our president, and we love him to death. I'm glad you could make it, Ryan. Yeah, he's making sure we don't mess up.
Yeah, he's spying. It's not my choice.
Nah, he's terrific. We love him. Glad you got to come, Ryan. If anybody else has anything, type it right now. Otherwise, we are going to call it. And hey, just so you guys know, Patrick will be leading a webinar in the next month or so, podcast style, on security. We haven't really nailed down exactly what it's going to be about yet, but we will. So look out for that. You can find all of these webinars and little tutorial videos and things like that on our social media. So our YouTube, it comes up on Instagram, it comes up everywhere. LinkedIn is a good one. We post all our stuff there, blog entries, all kind of stuff. So if you like to hear the stuff that we're producing, check out those platforms and you'll find a lot more of it. So thank y'all. Have a great day and we'll catch you later.
Thank you.